On the 6th of July 2018, the United States implemented a 25-cent tariff on Chinese products, costing about $34 billion US. In response to the move, the Chinese government imposed their own 25-cent tariff on roughly the same amount of products. This tactic became the new normal, a game where both countries began imposing their own tariffs in response to the tariffs placed on them, until about mid-December 2019, the United States and China agreed on a Phase 1 trade deal, temporarily ending the feud. Now, why did this happen in the first place? Back in 2016, as part of one of his campaign promises, President Trump declared that he would reduce the unfair trade deficit between the United States and China, and at the heart of that deficit is unfair trading practices like intellectual property theft. How does intellectual property theft play a role in trade deficits, and what is intellectual property? Intellectual property, or IP for short, is defined by the World Intellectual Property Organization as pertaining to creations of the mind such as inventions, literacy and artistic works, designs and symbols, names and images used in commerce. Most importantly, they are non-tangible, meaning they are not physical property. The idea of intellectual property stems back to the Roman and even Greek eras, where historians found references to discussions involving one's ownership of thoughts and ideas, but no real laws were created to protect the ownership. Some of the first laws established to protect intellectual property originated in England during the 17th and 18th century. These laws included 14-year patents on new ideas, which grew to include copyrights in 1706. These foundations of intellectual property rights were then built upon, most notably a clause in the United States Constitution, which gave Congress the power to, quote, promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to respective writings and discoveries, thus implementing intellectual property rights as fundamental rights. Now, it's a lot easier to enforce these fundamental rights within one nation, but post-World War II economies began expanding past their borders, and later in the 20th century, globalization began to occur worldwide. With the rise in globalization, nations around the world decided to throw away the outdated GATT agreement and institute the World Trade Organization in 1994. Another organization, the World Intellectual Property Organization, arose around that time, and the two established relations in Geneva in 1995, with an agreement to cooperate and uphold IP rights and promote global trade. Out of these organizations, the major takeaway is the TRIPS agreement, or the Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. TRIPS is the main driving force in protecting intellectual property rights when nations join into the World Trade Organization. Without the WTO and the WIPO, enforcement of IP rights would not be regulated, and thus, relationships between global trade and intellectual property were formed. Before we continue, let's further define the IP rights. In the United States, there are four main IPs. They are trademarks, trade secrets, copyrights, and patents. These types of IPs are protected in the United States and nations that are part of the WTO to encourage individuals and businesses to innovate and create. Without these protections, one could just steal groundbreaking technology and sell it as their own, or similarly, profit off of a piece of art that they did not themselves create. A recent example of IPR infringement is the enactment of the DMCA on streaming platforms such as YouTube and Twitch. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act is a law in the United States that protects the copyright holders from having the copyrighted material abused online, and allows them to take measures against third party that is illegally using the copyrighted material. In the case of the streaming platforms, users on the sites were found to be using music and images in their videos that they did not have the copyright holder's permission to use. While this may be a controversial issue and shown to be abused in the past, not having the systems in place would be catastrophic for furthering the industry of arts and sciences, two industries that are key of innovating society. The WIPO released a great video regarding IP protection, why it's important in society, and how dedicated they are to improving innovation through IP protection. Here, check it out.
Innovation. The uniquely human force that drives mankind's progress. Without innovation, your phone wouldn't be smart, there'd be no GPS, no music on the go, and no HD video, stories without special effects, no colour, no sound. And unable to look inside the human body, doctors would be in the dark. The intellectual property system exists to encourage the innovators and creators who make the world a better place. The World Intellectual Property Organization, a specialized agency of the United Nations, helps them do this every day across the globe. WIPO provides a forum where governments debate and shape intellectual property laws, such as copyright laws, to adapt them to the changing needs of our global digital society. WIPO's goal is to make intellectual property work for everyone. WIPO operates international filing systems that make it easier to protect and promote inventions, brands, and designs across borders. Everyone, from individual inventors and small businesses to the world's biggest companies, can file a single application through WIPO's PCT, Madrid, and Hague systems to apply for protection in countries across the world. This saves them time and money.
A large argument against IP laws is the information should be free, not protected so that businesses can make large profits. A commonly used example found in this argument are the patents surrounding medical technologies and vaccines, and pharmaceutical companies charging high prices to increase their profits. While this argument does have some truth behind it, the research and development costs that go into producing these drugs have been reported to reach up to $800 million. Patent protection allows these companies to raise prices in an effort to get their return on investment. And when companies get the return on investment, they're more likely to invest more in research and development. While this is not always the most beneficial for the consumer, the furthering of medicinal innovation through patents allows for society as a whole to benefit. That brings us to the most important aspect of intellectual property: innovation and creation. Without IP protection, the companies that do invest the money into research and development don't remain competitive in the market. Other companies can move in and produce the same product and sell it at the production cost, because they themselves don't have to adjust for the initial R&D investment. That creates a problem in the markets because companies trying to make the largest profits will not do so by innovating and creating the next best thing, but rather copying what other firms are doing and selling those products. In a capitalistic economy, more for less is key. And without IP protection, innovation would slow to a near halt. Technology created through layers of intellectual property have formed the society we live in today, and IP protections on the global scale have created the strongest global economy to have ever existed. However, there are some countries left behind. The principles of the aforementioned TRIPS agreement benefit the developed countries greatly, but there's a large criticism of this agreement regarding developing nations. Countries that do not have the scientific capabilities to invest heavily in research and development, and if they manage to, do not have a base of citizens willing to pay high prices, that is where the World Trade Organization comes in. It is their responsibility to promote global trade, especially in developing countries, ensuring that their products are able to be sold to larger markets. While the IP system contains flaws and causes conflict between the two of the largest economies in the world, intellectual property rights enable an innovation and creation that is essential to furthering society as a whole, and also create strong economies to help better humans all around the world.